Bowling Green Digest Issue 4, Bowling Green Autumn Renovations. Hello there, glad you could make it. My name's Henry Bechelet and I am Technical Manager for ICL Growing Solutions Turf and Landscape in the UK and Ireland. And to introduce myself, I'm a turfgrass agronomist by trade, but I also keep my hand in by volunteering to help with the maintenance of my local bowling club green. Okay, so I've decided to put together this audio version of the latest issue of our Bowling Green Digest, so that maybe you can listen along at a time that suits you. The idea with this is to try to make content that's more accessible and easier to take in without you needing to sit down and concentrate too hard. So this edition is about the upcoming Bowling Green autumn renovations, which is one of the most important periods in the bowling greenkeeping calendar. And first off, I suppose we get to make the point, which maybe the bowlers sometimes don't really appreciate, that the closure of the green at the end of the season doesn't really signal a period of well-earned rest for the greenkeepers. Actually, it marks the immediate start of our work preparing the green for next season. You know, far from being a time to relax, autumn is when we, start working really hard to make improvements with the condition of the green for next year. This is the moment when we press that reset button to try to create even better foundations for the green next year, when, if everything goes well, we might even be thinking about taking a run at the league. So the first thing we need to organise is to try to close the green as early as possible, ideally before the end of September. And this is not about being a spoil sport. It'd be great to keep on playing, wouldn't it? But closing the green early is about wanting to start work on our renovations, our improvement work, while the grass is still growing. Because the reality is that turf growth can really fall off a cliff, so to speak, in October. And so we really do need to get cracking as soon as possible, because our renovations are going to be quite aggressive, most likely, and we're going to need as much recovery as possible before things start to shut down for the winter. Now, some clubs do stay open later on in the year, especially those with floodlights and who play in winter leagues. And if that's the case, well, that's fine, but you need to go into it with eyes open, because continued use late into the autumn can severely limit what renovation work can realistically be done. And so if that is the case, then you'll probably need to adopt more of a patch and preserve approach rather than undertaking a full reset. But if we do need a full reset to bring about significant improvements, then we will need to renovate with a serious intent, which first of all means preparation and planning beforehand, because our end of season renovation programs do need to be fully targeted at the specific needs of the green. And we know that every green is different. And so your renovation program should be shaped by the problems that you're trying to solve, and not just be a repeat of what you tend to do every year and don't really know why. And so, when thinking about our programs, we'll need to ask ourselves, some searching questions about the green. Like, is the surface too soft and slow due to thatch buildup? Is thatch causing a susceptibility to the development of disease and dry patch? Is soil compaction an issue? Do we need to improve the quality of the grass cover with the establishment of better grass species? Things like, are the surface levels uneven, which would be quite an important issue for flat greens. Whatever the issues you're experiencing with your green, and there could be a lot more besides, your renovation program needs to be built around them. So, conduct a review, identify what needs to be done, and then select the treatments that will best deliver on those goals. Maybe with some specialist advice if you need it, but of course, be careful who you trust. And then start costing it out. Because this is essential maintenance and the cost needs to be factored in to the routine financial running of the club. And so if fundraising competitions need to be organised and run, or heaven forbid that the membership subscriptions need to be increased, then so be it. But be in no doubt, if you don't go at your end of season work fully committed, properly resourced, and with a clear purpose, then the impact will be diluted and you won't make any progress, and more likely you'll be presiding over a decline, which is not what anyone wants. Okay, so if we are thinking about making meaningful improvements with the condition and the performance of our greens in the autumn, then the primary focus of our end of season renovation schedule is usually on reducing, or managing at least, the level of organic matter or thatch that's accumulated in the upper soil profile. And this focus is always required, really, because for bowling greens, excessive thatch causes significant problems, and so it must be managed properly. At this stage, it might be best just to step back a little bit and explain a little further. And so, thatch is what we call the layer of dead and living fibrous organic material that builds up at the turf base between the turf canopy and the soil surface. It accumulates naturally as the turf discards old leaves, and so it will always need attention. And of course, too much fertilizer and too much irrigation inputs will also accelerate its build-up or stifle its natural breakdown. The problem is that thatch can act like a sponge to soften the playing surface and slow it down. Bowling greens needs to be firm to run properly. Excessive thatch also greatly increases the likelihood of damaging conditions such as disease and dry patch developing, which would ultimately compromise on surface smoothness during the playing season. Thatch also impedes water movement, and so can affect surface drainage, but also restrict deep root development. And the presence of thatch also creates ideal conditions for moss invasion and pest infestations. So essentially, thatch is the root of all evil when it comes to bowling greens, which is why we need to properly focus on it and keep it in check. Now, we can pick away and remove sort of shallow thatch from the turf base on an ongoing basis with regular in-season scarification and verticutting, but we do need to be careful with this approach because too much of either of these forms of vertical cutting may result in a deterioration in the quality of the grass cover. Our most desirable fine fescues and bent grasses, which are sort of naturally drought tolerant and hardy grasses, don't like too much physical damage, and so overdoing the verticutting and scarification to reduce the level of thatch accumulation can lead to deterioration, maybe even more significant deterioration in other areas. And so we sort of proceed with caution with that kind of in-season maintenance. And so, in general, we only really get one proper chance each year at the end of the season to try to deal with accumulated thatch in a meaningful way, with physical removal by hollow coring and deep scarification, and then dilution with the incorporation of sandy top dressing down into those sort of scarification tracks and open tine holes. And that's our sort of main way of keeping thatch in check and trying to reduce its negative influence. Now, the best way to determine the level of organic matter or thatch in your underlying soil profile is to carry out what is called a loss on ignition, or LOI, test. This will show the percentage of organic matter at various depths within the soil profile, which is key to targeting your renovation efforts effectively. As a guide, our target loss on ignition organic matter readings would be readings of less than 6% in the top 20 millimeters of the soil profile, and then less than 4% organic matter below that 20 millimeters. And readings above these target ranges would indicate that the performance and the health of the green is likely being adversely affected by excessive thatch accumulation, which will be obvious with the sort of problems you're experiencing, really. Disease, dry patch, soft, slow surfaces, etc. The point is, however, that the results from loss and ignition testing will help define how much restorative work is needed and where it should be targeted, to what depth. And the results will also allow you to track progress over time, showing whether your renovation efforts are being effective or insufficient. The numbers are way better than a visual assessment, and they can really help you focus in on what is probably the most important aspect of your greens maintenance program. We've got to keep thatch in check. I should say that it's also worth knowing that organic matter results do sometimes appear in routine soil nutrient test results, but usually these are not determined using the same method as the loss on ignition test, and so they generally underestimate the sort of organic matter content, sometimes by as much as half as what the loss on ignition test would be showing. So for a true understanding of what you're dealing with in terms of thatch, a proper loss on ignition test is essential. So go to strigroup.com or etl-ltd.com for information on the testing itself, but also how to submit samples for testing. So once we've decided what we need to do and where we need to focus our efforts, we need to pull it all together into a coherent program of work. Think of your end of season renovation program as a coordinated sequence of treatments, all aiming to bring about various improvements in the condition of the green, both above and below ground. Scarification, aeration, seeding, top dressing and fertilizing will all have their part to play in achieving an overall improvement. But remember, the clock is ticking with growth falling away each day, and so we need to pull it all together quickly and effectively and get it done with enough time to generate full recovery afterwards. Okay, a light feed is usually recommended before beginning our renovations in earnest. A healthy, actively growing sward will recover faster and stronger from the work ahead. And so an autumn fertilizer like the Greenmaster Pro Light Autumn 6-5-10 plus iron is made for the job. We generally recommend to apply this autumn fertilizer at a rate of around 30 to 35 grams per meter squared, maybe a week in advance of the planned renovation program, to allow time for the granules to disperse and for the turf to respond. Heavy scarification is usually the first main element of the renovation program proper. The goal here is to physically remove accumulated organic matter from the turf base and also help prepare a bed for subsequent overseeding and top dressing. Scarifying in two directions at slight angles to each other, maybe 15 degrees, aiming the blades to penetrate 5 to 10 millimeter deep to really get into that turf base, will do a good job. But be warned, you'll generate a huge volume of debris from this that will all need clearing away before you can move on to the next treatment. If you've got access to more specialist equipment, you might actually go further. Some scarifiers can inject dry sand directly into the grooves that they cut, which is a brilliant method of removing organic matter and replacing it with sandy material in one pass. After clearing up from scarification, we might then undertake an aeration treatment to address soil compaction or maybe target deeper organic matter removal. The choice between going with solid or holotine aeration would be based on the level of organic matter removal required and the depth that you need to reach. Where significant thatch is present below the depth of scarification, holotining, usually with 12mm tines, would be used to extract unwanted material from deeper down and also create space to work subsequent top dressing down into. Alternatively, solid tining might be chosen where organic matter levels are already under control, but compaction relief and general aerification is still needed. Repeated passes with solid tine can be particularly effective in loosening the compacted soil and helping to encourage deeper root development. We will be spiking later on in the autumn and winter, possibly to get deeper down, but now is a good time to make a start with compaction relief. Okay, so with scarification and aeration completed and all them cores removed, remember, the next step is generally overseeding, which is carried out to help restore and enhance the turf quality and density with better grass types. We generally use a high quality 80-20 fescue bent mix, such as the Pro Select 4, which contains highly rated cultivars of each. But there may be other influencing factors, such as like low soil pH, which might influence your final seed choice. It's probably worth speaking to a specialist on that or referring to your soil analysis results. But we shouldn't forget that overseeding is an important element of the renovation program because the grass types have a huge part to play with the performance of bowling greens. Fescues and bents in particular can create unnaturally fine, dense and smooth surface that is ideal for bowling, and, as I previously mentioned, they are sort of naturally hardy plants which allow you to keep the green drier and firmer, possibly during the summer, and faster as a result than if the surface was dominated by annual meadowgrass, which has very little stress tolerance and is susceptible to a number of damaging diseases, and essentially doesn't allow you to sort of push so hard, especially if we're looking to maintain a firm and dry surface. But let's talk about grass types in more detail in a future edition. But suffice it to say that you need to take overseeding in the autumn seriously because the grass types are so important. Okay, so beyond our seed choice, the overseeding method is also important. Essentially, our aim with the seeding is to achieve a good seed-to-soil contact, which will greatly assist with the germination and early establishment of the new seedlings. Broadcasting seed over scarification grooves and aeration holes can be quite an effective approach, provided it is applied immediately after those treatments and then immediately followed by top dressing and a thorough brushing in to ensure that the seed does in fact achieve that contact with the soil. But there are also specialist overseeding machines that actually place the seed directly into the surface and so in contact with the soil with a greater level of accuracy and effectiveness, and so less waste and possibly a better establishment as a result. So these are things to be thinking about. But either way, immediate seeding after scarification and aeration is needed to get the seed into that open surface. And of course, remembering still that time is also of the essence to maximize establishment before those soil temperatures begin to drop, the seed becomes less likely to germinate and establish strongly. Top dressing is next, and it's important to get your material right. First off, you must use a specialist bowling green top dressing, which is typically a medium sand dominated mix, maybe 80-20 with an element of loam soil. The quantity of top dressing required will depend on your renovation objectives. For an intensive thatch replacement program involving deep scarification and intensive holotining, you might need 4 to 5 tons of top dressing for an average sized green, 1,500 square meters. But for a lighter renovation, where maybe organic matter removal hasn't been a major objective, then 2 to 3 tons might suffice. And of course, there's the method of application. Now, top dressing can be applied by specialist top dressers to make the job a whole lot easier and to ensure even application. But if you're doing the work in-house, this might be a back-breaking task of barrowing it on and spreading the dressing with a shovel, which I hope it isn't. I've done that before. So yeah, this might be the thing that means you get a specialist contractor in. But after application, you will need to brush repeatedly to help the material settle down into the scarification tracks and down the aeration holes and work its way down into the soil profile. And repeated brushing will be needed because the dressing can bridge over the top of open holes, and so repeated brushing is needed to work the sand down into open tine holes. And this is how we dilute the thatch, really, and ultimately create a firmer and more agronomically robust playing surface. And so keep working away at it in the days and weeks after treatment. With flat greens, you might also be looking to improve the surface levels, and so localized attention to low spots might be required, and working it using a long straight edge or lute to help level them out properly. So a fully focused end-of-season renovation program for your bowling green is a big commitment. And you can see that it's really hard work, which is why many clubs choose to engage contractors to get the work done. They've got the machinery, they've got the manpower and the experience to get the job done to a high standard within a short window. But don't leave it to the last minute to get organised, because good contractors get booked up early. If you are handling your end-of-season work in-house, then you'll need to mobilise a good number of volunteers. Jobs like clearing up scarification debris or core collection and brushing in your top dressings can't be done solo. But be realistic, this is labour-intensive work, and so don't ask too much of too few people. You're going to need to organise well and support and reward your helpers. Once the renovation work is complete, we enter a new phase, one of recovery, not just the green, and preservation. The grass growth will be slowing down as we move into October, but hopefully it won't stop too soon. So there should be a time to consolidate the work that you've done and lock in those improvements that you've made. But now you also need to start protecting the surface from the emerging pressures that occur during the autumn and winter. Greenkeeping really is never ending. And the number one task post-renovation is to limit the development of microdochium patch disease, formerly known as fusarium. Microdochium patch can develop quickly in damp autumnal condition to cause extensive scarring that could easily persist into next year and taint the start of the next season with a bumpy surface if you're not careful. The best defense against the development of microdochium patch disease is by taking a proactive and integrated approach, starting with sound cultural practices. You will need to switch or brush regularly to remove any surface dew, especially on those damp autumn mornings. Dew creates the perfect conditions for disease development, and so keeping the surface as dry as possible with dew removal is key during this period. We also need to maintain plant health and turf quality through this time with appropriate nutrition. And especially further south, a late autumn fertilizer like the Green Master ProLite Invigorator 438 plus 4% iron, applied in October/November, depending on conditions, can help keep the sward strong and resilient. The iron content will also help us maintain turf quality at the expense of moss invasion. And indeed, occasional liquid or soluble iron applications during the autumn and early winter can also help in this regard. In high disease pressure situations, especially in sheltered, shaded or damp settings, a fungicide may be required to keep damaging microdochium patch disease outbreaks at bay. Now, fungicides are approved professional plant protection products which can only be applied by suitably qualified spray operatives. And also the product should only be handled and stored strictly according to the conditions of the product approval as well. And so for detailed guidance in this area and for up-to-date product information on what to use and when, visit syngentaturf.com for specialist advice. Pest activity can also be an issue in the autumn. Worm casting typically increases at this time, and so swishing with a cane to scatter fresh casts will help prevent smearing and surface damage. We also need to keep our eye out for crane fly activity, particularly in September/October. If significant numbers are noted and seem to be laying their eggs on the green, then an application of acelepryn a specialist turf insecticide may be appropriate to localized areas. With acelepryn, you're only permitted to spray 10% of the total surface area of managed amenity turf at any given facility. Again, acelepryn is a registered professional plant protection product, and its use and storage must strictly follow label guidance. Speak to a qualified basis advisor if you are unsure what is and isn't permitted with regard to the use of professional plant protection products. Finally, don't forget about the green surrounds. Early autumn is a good time to prune hedges, lift tree canopies, and open up the green surface to improve light and airflow. A few hours spent opening up the surrounds can pay dividends throughout the winter and into next spring, because reducing the level of shade and enhancing the airflow will create a less sheltered and damp environment that is less prone to the development of disease and moss that can wreak havoc during the autumn and winter period. And so that's about it, I think, for this time. Hopefully it's clear to you that autumn is an important time for greenkeeping. It might be the end of the playing season, but actually it marks the start of the bowling greenkeeping calendar, and this is our chance really to make big improvements with the condition and the performance of the green for next year. And so we need to take this program seriously and schedule it properly. So whether you're closing earlier and getting on or playing through, just be clear that the actions that you take now will shape what kind of surface you will be taking into next season. So if you can, close the green early and renovate with a serious intent if you want to bring about those much needed improvements. And then stay focused on preserving your progress, because it's true to say the best greens take shape in the autumn, and so now is the time to really get stuck in. So good luck and catch up next time. Thanks for listening.